everybody. Here is a video that gives you guys an overview of shaping and chaining. So for this video, our objectives are on the left, and our agenda is we're first going to talk about what shaping is, and then talk about reinforcement and extinction of shaping. Then we're going to get into chaining and talk about a task analysis, and then some different chaining techniques. So let's first start with shaping. Shaping is defined as the process of systematic and differentially reinforcing of successive approximations to a target behavior. So basically, with shaping, you identify a target behavior that you want the kid to engage in, and then you reinforce successive approximations to that target behavior. And when you're doing this, you're reinforcing those approximations, you're using that differential reinforcement. So you're reinforcing one set of behaviors and putting another set of behaviors under extinction. So you're going to start out reinforcing an initial behavior that is typically a distant approximation of the target behavior. And then once that initial behavior starts to occur, you're going to stop reinforcing that behavior and reinforce the behavior that more closely is a more closer approximation to your target behavior. So for example, if you want to shape up a kid putting their glasses on, the first day, so you would first figure out, what's our target behavior that's putting the glasses in their proper position, and then you would figure out, okay, what behavior is our initial behavior? Where are we starting? So for this example, we started with touching glasses, first day of training. This is our first initial successive approximation. And like I stated in that last slide, it's usually a distant approximation to the actual target behavior, but it's a start. So the kid starts touching his glasses, you're reinforcing that. After the kid is reliably touching the glasses, you're going to put touching glasses under extinction. And a lot of times what you get is an extinction burst. So you typically get some novel behavior. They're not getting reinforced for touching their glasses anymore. And if your kids are nonverbal, they'll start to engage in other behaviors. Not necessarily nonverbal. Other kids get too. But you would essentially, they would engage in those novel behaviors, the extinction burst, and they might pick up the glasses. So that picking up glasses is a closer approximation. So now you're going to reinforce picking up glasses where touching glasses is under extinction. Once they're reliably picking up the glasses, you're going to put picking up glasses under extinction and reinforce putting the glasses to your face. Once they're reliably putting the glasses to their face, you're going to put that under extinction and reinforce placing the glasses in their proper position. So you have reinforced successive approximations to the target behavior. And you use that differential reinforcement in the sense that when they're on to the more closer approximation, you're going to really reinforce that approximation, but not the one previously. So with shaping, it can be used deliberately to establish new responses, reinstate old ones. If you want to change some dimension, so you want, maybe a kid is talking really, really softly and you want to increase that intensity, you can use shaping to do that. Like I said, establishing new responses. If the kid has not engaged in the response before, can't do it, you can shape up the response and things like that. There are some limitations of shaping. It is very time consuming. The progress is not always linear. You always need to monitor the learner because you can actually misapply shaping. We often say that shaping is an art and that you have to essentially catch the next closer approximation. If you don't continually monitor the learner and don't catch that approximation, you might shape a skill that looks nothing like your target behavior. And then one other thing is that harmful behavior can be shaped too. We talk about using shaping to establish new appropriate skills, but you can shape up harmful behavior. We talked about extinction and those extinction bursts, and if you reinforce a challenging behavior at the top of an extinction burst, you're actually going to shape up a response that's more intense and basically worse than your original challenging behavior. So keep that in mind. All behaviors can be shaped appropriate and inappropriate. You do not want to use shaping when the person already engages in the target behavior, just not enough. In those instances, you want to simply just kind of reinforce the target behavior. Or if you can easily get the behavior to occur with instructions, modeling, or other prompts, then you want to go ahead and use your prompts. So the person already engages in the behavior, they're just not doing it enough, then differential reinforce it or use your prompts. And that often leads to faster acquisition of them engaging in the problem behavior as opposed to using shaping. But if you have a new skill that the person's not already engaging in, then shaping is a really good technique. All right, shaping guidelines. You always want to define your target behavior. You want to determine whether shaping is an appropriate procedure. Determine the criterion for success. So when are you deciding to move to the next closer successive approximation? Identify your starting behavior. So what's your initial behavior? Where are you going to start at? And then choose your shaping steps. So this is a challenge. You don't want to make the steps too difficult or too far apart. It can be too challenging for the learner, and you don't want to make them too close together. It can be too easy for the learner, and so that's kind of why we say that shaping is an art. Choose your reinforcer. Make sure it's something that the kid really wants, and then, like we talked about earlier, differentially reinforce those successive approximations. So when you move to a new approximation that's closer to the target behavior, that's where you get your powerful reinforcers, and you get either no reinforcement or less powerful reinforcers. Well, typically no reinforcement because you put those other behaviors that they were doing that are not as close, that are lesser approximations under extinction. And then you want to move through those shaping steps at a proper pace. Okay, let's get into chaining. So chaining is used to teach more complex behaviors. And these behaviors typically consist of a relatively thick sequence of responses. And so basically, each response produces a stimulus change or a change in the environment. And that change serves two things. One, it serves a reinforcer for the response, and then it serves as an antecedent that evokes the next response in the sequence. Or, if you put it more simply, use our terminology with ABA, it may be an SD that provides an opportunity for the next response. So, for example, if we want to teach the kid to eat ice cream, so the first SD, he might see the bowl of food and a spoon on the table. So he might see the ice cream and the spoon on the table. So his behavior is going to be to pick up the spoon, and that behavior produces a stimulus change, meaning now the spoon is in their hand. So that stimulus change is a reinforcer for the behavior of picking up the spoon, and also an SD for the next step in the sequence. So now the spoon is in hand, the child can put the spoon in the bowl, and now the spoon is in the food. So the spoon in the food is a reinforcer for putting the spoon in the bowl, and also an SD for the next step. So now the spoon is in the food, you scoop the food onto the spoon, and now the food is on the spoon. The food is on the spoon now, that's the SD for lifting the spoon and putting it in your mouth, and the reinforcer for that is eating the food or eating the ice cream. And so typically when you do these behavior changes, that last response in the chain results in a reinforcer that is the natural outcome of the chain. So the natural outcome of eating your ice cream is actually eating the ice cream. And so that last step results in that natural reinforcer. Important characteristics of behavioral change is that it involves the performance of specific series of discrete responses. So you can actually map out these discrete responses that are involved in this complex behavior. The performance of each behavior in the sequence produces that change in the environment, like we talked about earlier. So it becomes a reinforcer and an ST for the next response in the sequence. And then typically with behavior changes, responses are performed in a specific sequence, and it's usually in a temporal succession. So these chains or the different tasks that you lay out in your behavioral chain, they typically don't change in order. It's a temporal sequence. Okay, when you first start doing chaining, you want to lay out what we call a task analysis. And this is when you're going to provide a written list of all of the stimulus response units of a behavioral change. of a behavioral chain, sorry. This is always the first step in teaching these complex behaviors and using chaining. You want to go and do your task analysis. So map out each step, each task that is involved in that complex skill. The size of the unit depends on the learner. So if you have more of a low-functioning learner, you might have lots of different steps in here. Whereas if you have a learner that's more advanced, you might be able to combine some of these steps and only have a couple of steps. So, you know, after the knife is in hand and they lift above the top of the mayo jar, you might be able to just go from knife in the hand to putting the knife in the jar. You might not need this kind of extra step in there. And that depends on your learner and how much you need to break it down. To figure out the steps, you can do it a couple different ways. You can perform the task yourself. You can observe somebody else doing the task and kind of write down the different steps. Or you can consult an expert. Either one of those is fine. I do want to make a note that your learner doesn't need to read or understand your task analysis. That's all for you. The learner can be somebody that doesn't understand language at all. So the task analysis is for you and for you to be able to break it down so that you can set them up for success and accurately teach them a complex skill. Here's an example of a task analysis for washing your face. So turning on the sink, holding the washcloth under the water, putting soap on it, rubbing the sides of the washcloth, and so on. Okay, for chaining, when you're teaching these steps in your task analysis, it involves a systematic application of prompting and fading strategies to teach each step or each component in the chain. And so what you're going to do is you're going to teach each step in the chain as it follows. So first thing, you want to present your initial instruction. So for example, make a sandwich. And then present the instruction for the step that you're teaching. Open refrigerator. If the learner opens the refrigerator, great. If not, you're going to use your prompts. You're going to praise or otherwise reinforce your correct responses. And then you're going to fade your prompts out. When the behavior occurs without prompts, you're going to move to the next step. And there are 3 general strategies for putting this whole thing together. So the first one is what we call backward chaining. If you use backward chaining, you're going to teach the last step first. So you as a teacher initially complete all the steps or you prompt all the steps, and then you're going to teach that last step. So if your learner is learning 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, how to put that sequence together, then you as a therapist would prompt 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then you would start to teach 6, and you would fade that out until the client says 6 on their own and makes that independent response. And then you're going to go to the second to last step. So you're going to prompt 1, 2, 3, 4, and then you're going to start fading the prompt out for 5 until the client can say 5, 6. Then you're going to move backwards. So you're going to prompt 1, 2, 3 and teach 4, and then the client should be able to say 4, 5, and 6. If we go back to our, so you want to use this when there's a natural reinforcer at the end of the chain or when the task termination is a reinforcer. And so let's go back to our ice cream. So we broke it down a little less steps here. So you got the bowl of food and spoon on the table. You pick up the spoon. The spoon's in your hand. You put the spoon in the bowl. The spoon is in the food. So you scoop the food onto the spoon. The food is on the spoon now. You lift the food and put it in your mouth. So to use backward chaining in this situation, we would prompt picking up the spoon, putting the spoon in the bowl, scooping the food onto the spoon, and then we would start teaching this last step. And we would fade out the prompts till the kid can independently lift the food and put the food in the mouth. And backward chaining is really great because once the kid puts the food in their mouth, they get that natural reinforcer and they get to eat the ice cream. So that last step produces that natural reinforcer. So that's a really cool thing with backward chaining. Forward chaining is you provide a reinforcer after each response in the chain. And so what you're going to do with forward chaining is you're going to teach the first step first and then add one step at a time. So if we go back to our teaching the numbers 1 through 6. You're going to prompt 1, teach 1 until the kid is saying 1 by himself. You'll provide a reinforcer. A lot of times the reinforcers for forward chaining are contrived because they're not doing the last step independently, so they really don't get that natural reinforcer. Got 1, then you teach 2. To master, you prompt 2. So now the kid is saying 1, 2. Then you teach 3. The kid is saying 1, 2, 3, and so on. And so when you provide a reinforcer after each step, what happens is the outcome of each response becomes a conditioned reinforcer, and therefore it moves the chain forward. And so you want to use forward chaining if the learner can already perform most of the steps but doesn't have them chained together, or the first part of the chain, the first components of the chain are really easy to teach. So the first steps are the easiest. So let's go back to our ice cream example. So in this example, you would teach this first step. So you would be prompting the bowl of food on the table, the spoon, and picking it up, and you would fade your prompt. So you would teach this step first, and then you would prompt all the other steps. So you would start to fade out your prompts for this first step until the kid is independently picking up the spoon. And then you prompt the rest of them. So once he's reliably picking up the spoon, then you're going to fade the prompts for putting the spoon in the bowl until he's independently putting the spoon in the bowl. And so you teach it going forward, just like that. The last strategy is what we call total task presentation. So this is when you're going to teach the entire chain without requiring mastery of one step at a time. So you basically prompt during each step if the learner needs it, and then you're going to fade the prompts until the learner can perform the entire chain independently. And this is how typically, parents and teachers for typically developing kids oftentimes teach these complex behaviors. And so it is useful for higher functioning learners and if you have a simple or a brief chain. However, these can oftentimes be hard. It's a chaining strategy that the learners engage in the most amount of errors. So these are really hard. You typically don't want to use this if you have a kid with autism that's lower functioning, or you have a really complex, long behavioral chain, because it does result, like I said, in the most errors. So if we were going to use total task presentation, we would say, pick up the spoon. Kid does it independently, great. If not, we would do prompting. We would say, put the spoon in the bowl. The kid does it independently, great. If not, you would provide prompting. Scoop the food onto the spoon. If he does it, great. Then you would provide prompting, and so on. So you're going to teach each step and provide prompting as needed. Similarities to all these methods, they're all used to teach complete tasks or chains of behavior. You have to do a task analysis for each of these 3 procedures, so that should always be your first step in chaining. And prompting and fading strategies are used in all 3 procedures. Differences in total task presentation, the learner is prompted through the entire task in each learning trial. But in forward chaining and backward chaining, the teacher teaches one component at a time and then chains those components together. Other chaining strategies that you guys might see, written task analysis. So recipes, when you're cooking, those are written task analysis that we use in everyday life. You read each step and then perform it, and so that written analysis serves as that prompt. Picture prompts, if you guys have ever had to put together Legos or a piece of furniture and they provide pictures, that's a picture prompt, chaining strategy. Video modeling or self-instructions and rules are also training strategies. All right, some chaining guidelines. You want to make sure that chaining is appropriate. You want to develop that task analysis. You want to make sure you get a baseline assessment of the learner's ability. That's going to teach you or tell you, what type of strategy you need to engage in and where you need to start in the chain. Choose your training method, implement the training procedure, and then continue to reinforce the behavior after it is learned. And then after the behavior is learned, remember, you want to do that continuous reinforcement schedule until the behavior is really acquired. And then you want to gradually thin out the schedule so that you maintain the behavior. Alright guys, we talked about shaping, we talked about how to do shaping, we talked about chaining, doing that task analysis, and then we talked about the different chaining techniques, forward, backward, and total task presentation. So thank you guys so much for watching. If you guys have any questions, then please let me know. Alright, thanks guys.